everybody. Welcome to the Clean Comedy Podcast. And today I have a great guest for you. I met this guy while doing JR's Comedy Club. If you guys know, I do JR's a lot. And then I met him at Ha Ha Cafe, hanging out there. He was great to hang out with, just super fun. He's been on World's Dumbest on TruTV. He's been on VH1, a bunch of random clip shows. He's been on Comics Unleashed with Byron Allen, which is like a dream of mine to like do one day. And he's been on like Modern Family, Law and Order, Hawaii Five-O, Bones, Disney Channel. He's been on, you've seen him. You're probably, the moment that you see him, you're going to go, oh yeah, I know that guy. I just don't know his name. And I hate when that happens to comedians because more comedians need to be known. But if you don't know him, he's very funny. Please welcome Greg Wilson. Greg, welcome to the show. Do you like to go by Greg Wilson or Greg Romero Wilson? Because I know you.
Greg Romero Wilson. Greg Romero Wilson is the current. I used to be the Greg Wilson. That was my branding when I was a younger comic, picking indoors, acting like a rock star. Then I got old, and I decided to lean in more to and also, being Hispanic and then having the whitest name in the universe was not helpful. So I had to put the Romero in there because, these shows that you're talking about, I would spend half the audition talking about explaining how I was Mexican, which was terrible. It's funny, when I was a kid growing up in the suburbs in Plano and Dallas, suburbs of Dallas and stuff like that, I was fine with it, because everyone around me was white. So I was like this undercover Mexican, and and then I got older and then I was the Greg Wilson. Then I just, in Hollywood, it was just one of those things where I was going out for a lot of Hispanic roles. And I felt like I wasn't getting some very big roles because of the fact that how can you justify giving this, this Latino character, Marco Chavez, whatever, to a guy named Greg Wilson.
Yeah.
So it became about bringing that heritage to the forefront. So Greg Romero Wilson kind of became more important, just so that I didn't have to spend a lot of time explaining how, because the Wilson name is by adoption. Okay. It's not my family's name. My father was born a Calleros. My mother's a Romero, but my father was adopted by his stepfather, Marvin Wilson, and so we all became Wilsons. But it wasn't. It was definitely not. There's no Wilson blood in it.
Well,
so it was just about really identifying that, making that an easier thing for people to see.
That's pretty awesome, though. That's like a great thing, is like to be able to play in both of those worlds. Because like I also grew up in Texas. I grew up in Central Texas, and so I was the only white kid in all black neighborhood. So I had I was like undercover there. They're like, and they consider me like one of their own. Like, so I never, it was wild. So what's funny is I didn't understand that racism existed until I actually moved to the suburbs. So I moved out of the hood and then moved to the suburbs, and I was like, oh, there really is racism. I didn't because it didn't exist. Like, to me, with seeing everything day to day, it didn't exist. And then seeing it later on, I was like, oh, that does happen. Okay. Interesting, so that's weird that they would, see you and then go, no, you're white. It's like, but I'm not. If you look at me, I'm not.
I mean, right. But I mean, when you look at the paper and it says Gregory Wilson, I mean, it just, and the only reason I have this super white name, is because I was the one child they let my grandmother name.
Okay.
And she wanted to name me Gregory, and then we had this name Will, and that's it. And I just became, it just on paper it looks like I'm the whitest guy in the universe.
I know somehow you sound whiter than me, and that's crazy.
And that's the other thing, growing up in the suburbs, I wasn't raised around the rest of my family. The rest of my family, we're talking about cholos, cholitas, like, very different, Gilroy, California, Modesto, California. I mean, we're talking about, that culture. And it was weird because, whenever we would go visit them, I mean, here come the Wilsons to visit the Calleros, and so we definitely were our own corner of the Calleros y Romero clan. So it was kind of a different, kind of a weird experience growing up.
Do you ever have that weird, like, thing where, like, maybe you don't recognize some things in Latino culture because you grew up like in the suburbs? Like, do some things like throw you off sometimes?
Not at all, not at
Okay.
all. Because I mean, being my family, I mean, I definitely saw it and grew up with it enough. Staying with my grandmother, staying with my cousins, that I definitely was immersed in it quite a bit. But at the same time, we're like the only ones in a family that don't speak Spanish.
Oh.
My parents both spoke it fluently. They were raised in El Paso and they spoke fluent Spanish, but they only spoke it to each other because it was like their secret language to be able to speak about anything in front of us, and we had no idea what they were talking about. So they never spoke to us. So I never really learned it, which one of the great disappointments of my life. But my mother told us that it was really a deliberate choice on my father's part because he felt having a Hispanic accent really hurt him in the workplace. And again, we're talking about the 70s. We're talking about the 80s, a very different time. And so he didn't want us to grow up having a Hispanic accent. He wanted us to just speak, plain white English, and that's what we were raised around and that's what we spoke. And so, there was a lot of, and when I got to New York, I remember Lucian Hold at the comic store was like, you got to really talk about being Mexican. We don't have a lot of Mexicans in New York. You got to talk about it. I'm like, well, I got to tell you, I'm not bringing a lot of Mexico with me. Like, you still don't have a lot of Mexicans in New York. I mean, I may be one, but I'm not, it's like, I'm not, orale, what's up, although I've played that role before. I played a Louis Cruz on that show Upload on Amazon. And what's funny is when I went in to read for it, I could tell exactly who the character was. He's the guy in the Dodgers jersey, East LA, East Los, he's like, hey, what's up? So I knew that was what was written on the page. So I decided to fully be that guy going into the audition. So I walked in as Louis Cruz, so I feel like Greg Daniels thought I really sounded that way. I think he thought he was, getting an authentic East Los Latino. And then, we go for the table read. I'm like, hey, thank you. Great to see you. Yes, I appreciate the opportunity. And I just remember his eyes got really wide, like, oh, shit. It was a character. And then I'm doing it like, hey, I'm Louis Cruz. What's up? I just want to remind you guys to log into my channel and all this. And so, and I think that may have actually hurt the role ultimately because the role was supposed to recur a few times and then it didn't. So, so I don't know if that had anything to do with it, if they felt like, but I'm a character actor. I was doing the character you wrote on the page. Yeah. I certainly wasn't trying to dupe anybody. I was trying to be authentic to the character on the page, and I knew what he was going for, and it worked. It just, I think he was very surprised to find out that I sounded more like Greg Wilson than Greg Romero Wilson.
Right. Now, when you started comedy, did you start in Texas or would you start in New York? Like, what was your comedy journey, and kind of like give us a background on that and your history?
Oh, I started in Texas. I started in Texas in the 90s. The first time I did stand-up was in 89, in the fall of 89. But then in the spring of 90, I discovered Troupe Improv. And if you'll remember, the 90s was the 80s was the explosion of stand-up, but the 90s was the explosion of Troupe Improv, improv games and all those things, comedy sports, theater sports. And we were, a troupe called Ad Libs. And we really blew up in Dallas to the point where we had our own club and we were doing 4 sold-out shows a week, and we were doing corporate events and colleges and traveling all the time. And so I was like, screw stand-up, this was like being in a hilarious band, I'm with this band of brothers, and we're going out there, we're rocking the crowd, and we were like the second city of the South, we were, and getting a lot of girls and going to all the clubs, and it was a rock star life, and I did that for pretty much all of the 90s. And then around 97, I began to think, this can only take me so far. Being in a troupe, and yes, we're successful in Dallas. Yes, I'm a local celebrity in Dallas, but at a certain point, I wanted to play the big game, and realistically, I wanted to be on Saturday Night Live. So I realized that the choice for me was to go back to stand up, and at that point, my material was far too dirty for Dallas. And so then I was like, well, I'm going to go to New York where I can really say what I want. So that's what I did, So in 2000, I moved to New York. So, and that's when the focus and concentration in stand-up really began.
Wow. And then, so that going to New York, did you notice there was it a grind to go there? I know, like, they always say, like, oh, if I don't know if you heard this, but like they always say, if you're going to start stand up, never start in LA. Either go to New York,
yes, I agree
or Chicago, or somewhere else. Like, go some other market and then come to LA, but never start in LA. I unfortunately did not know that, and I started in LA, so it's made it 10 times harder than it should be. But did you find that New York was a great grooving ground for you? Were you able to grow faster there?
Oh my God, yes. Because at every level, you can do many spots a week.
Yeah.
I was at the beginner level, doing the open mic circuit and stuff like that. But the open, because there was just a bevy of bar shows and, of course, multiple clubs, that were willing to give me opportunities. And I ended up breaking all of the clubs before I left, in 2006. Wow. So, from 2000 to 2006, I went from open mics. And then I was also the star of the largest comedy show in New York called the Comedy Madhouse. Which was at the Supper Club in Times Square, and that was for like 1,200 people on Saturday nights. And I was the star of that show. I was the host and star of the show. And so I was the only comic on every single one of them. And it was my show. And there was, I went from, the very beginning, in 6 years, I made it all the way to, I broke the Cellar, I broke the Strip, I broke Stand Up New York. I was a regular at every place. And it was a really exciting ride. I mean, but that could only happen in New York where you can get that many reps, where you can get that kind of stage time. I came to New York, came to LA, and everything kind of flatlined, including me. I was so tired. New York really wore me out that I really, for the first like 2 years in LA, I pretty much just did the Laugh Factory. Wow. I would do it like, 1 to 3 times a week. And that was plenty for me. I didn't go out and do I would do occasional bar shows, but I really didn't do much else because I was just I had chronic fatigue from New York because I had been pushing so hard for those 6 years. So, but New York is, for me, the greatest place. You want to be a stand-up, go to New York, spend a few years, grind it out. Really, really, that's really where you cut your teeth, and then you can do it in other cities. There are other good towns for it. San Francisco is a good town for it. And every city has kind of a comedy scene now, but there's just nothing. But New York is the hardest city in the world to survive in, and so, surviving and just living is its own challenge on top of trying to make it as an artist. So, I mean, it definitely is not for the faint of heart or the weak of stomach. You better go when you got some energy and some fortitude, and because it's gonna take every ounce you got, when you're in New York. But God, I wouldn't trade it for the world. It was the best 6 years of my life.
That's awesome. I keep on thinking, like, maybe I should go to New York for like 2 years and just grind and then come back.
Well, the question is, do you have a wife and kids?
I do have a wife and kids, but my kids are going to move out in a couple of years. And my wife and I have already talked about, like, okay, maybe we go to New York for 2 years and I just grind.
Yeah, that's great. So long as the kids are gone, I mean, anybody that tries to do it's hard enough with the spouse, but you try and factor kids into the equation. It's too hard. It's too much. Yeah. There's too many things to worry about just as a city, and it's so expensive and everything that comes along with it. Yeah, I would never recommend that. It's definitely. But if they're almost gone and you got your life back, I always say that as someone that teaches stand up, there's 2 kinds of people that come to me. It's usually people that are in their 20s that are just starting out, very early 20s, and then or they're these guys that are kind of late 40s who are finally getting the kids off and can now go back to doing what they wanted to do. Yeah. They've been kind of looking over their shoulder at it for 20, 25 years. And now that, the kids are off to college and they can finally get back to them, to focusing on their dreams. Yeah. And so those are kind of the 2 age groups that I see the most in my classes.
Well, let's talk about your classes. What are they? How do people sign up for them? Are they in person? Are they online? Like, what's the process? All that kind of stuff.
Well, it's all of the above. Okay. We've all had to adapt over the last several years, and I've had to adapt too, and I've enjoyed adapting. So for me, I mean, if you go, my website is thecomedyinstitute.com, thecomedyinstitute.com, and And so I teach, and I don't teach. My teaching is different from everybody else's teaching and it was designed to be that way, because when I started out, I took a workshop, I didn't learn anything. And most of the workshops tend to be one thing, which is watch and critique. They just watch, and then they tell you what they would do with your material. And that's one way. But what I try to do is, like, my mastering stand-up class is just everything you need to know about the process of stand-up. And I give you a lot of, I'm very formula based. I call it the science of stand up, because I want to show you how you can do your material better. I don't want to try and put my voice into your material, although that happens in the 5-week class. But it's really about just teaching you about the dynamics of how to write punchlines, how to structure your bits, how to create material, and then the polishing process, the proving process, then the business, the politics of stand-up. The politics is a huge part of it. So there's so many facets to stand-up, and they're all kind of in that class. Now, that class used to be just, 2 nights of an overwhelming amount of information. And so now I've taken that and I put it streaming. That's now on teachable.com, comedyinstitute.teachable.com. And that one, now anybody can take that from anywhere, because it's purely informational. It doesn't require me to see your act. It doesn't require me to give you feedback on what you're doing. You can watch it, take those structures, apply them what you do. So that was always my main focus, was that course. But what I found was, when I would give them all this information and do all these things, then I would go back and watch them, and I'd see that they missed so many implementation points, and they'd be still doing so many things wrong. And that's when I realized, okay, now I need to really focus on giving them very specific skills workshops. And now these workshops, I tend to only do live. These are not, although I am probably going to put the crowd work one up on Teachable here in the next couple of months. But so it's crowd work and riffing, which, obviously is very popular right now. Then I have a handling hecklers class, which I developed. And with these classes, like, I invented the skill games, the exercises that we do in the workshops. I created them specifically to train your mind to go through the thought processes of doing these things correctly. And so, so the handling hecklers, I put you in the heckler experience, which even in a controlled environment is an incredibly emotional moment. I try and tell them, like, you're going to feel it, like, it's going to hurt, but at the end, they get a sense of what to expect and how to handle that moment and control their emotions in it, which is a huge part of it.
Right.
Hosting is such an incredibly important skill. Most comics do it the exact opposite of the way it's supposed to be done. And so I just kind of, here's the skill set, here's what it takes, here's which is kind of this hybrid between crowd work and handling hecklers and doing material. Like, it's its own unique animal. And the timing of it also, when you got to pitch in and when you don't, there's a lot of very nuanced moments to hosting. So that's why I created a hosting workshop. And storytelling. Storytelling is back in a big way. It never really would have, and really, if you think about it, storytelling is the foundation art form behind stand-up comedy. Stand-up comedy grew from storytelling. And then it was in the 60s, 50s and 60s, when they began to do more of the socio-political analysis and the observational stuff, that it began to really morph into modern stand-up, away from just storytelling and just jokey jokes.
Right.
That's when it began to really take on the voice of modern stand-up. But storytelling is just this foundational thing. But the modern audience, the way that they take in it, they're not going to give you the time in a stand-up setting.
Yep.
That they would in just a storytelling, where they let you set it all up and you go on forever without a punchline or whatever. Modern storytelling for stand-up has to be structured like material. So it's about taking the story and then breaking it down and then structuring it up and punching it up so that it functions like material. It's its own process. It's its own animal, but it's one that I've mastered and one that I share the dynamics of. And usually people, it's funny because some people leave there with, a 10-minute story that works like a charm. And some people leave there with nothing because they brought in story examples that weren't good stories for stand-up. There's certain key elements that your story has to have in order to make the jump from stand-up interesting to stand-up comedy.
Okay.
and unfortunately a lot of stories are just stand-up interesting. So, so these classes I teach in person. Those are in person work. The skills workshops are in person workshops. Mastering stand-up, I teach it's only available now on Teachable because it's just such an exhausting class to teach. I mean, you would have to pay me a truckload of money to do it live now. But then my 5-week workshop is over Zoom, which I'm about to wrap it up right now. Okay. I'm in the middle of it right now, and I'm about to finish. We're heading towards week 5. It'll be next week. And that one I do over Zoom because, I mean, Zoom, people have gotten so comfortable with Zoom now, like we are discussing it. And really, there's not a lot of difference between being in this vacuum versus being in an empty club or a room, with just the same people anyway. There's very little difference, to be perfectly honest. And so the developmental process, I don't feel is hindered in any way. And it honestly, it makes it a lot easier for the comics to attend. They don't have to drive. They don't have to, you know what I mean? They just sit down at their desk or in their car, whatever, clicking on, and we work,
I love it.
So
do you also do like one-on-one coaching too? Like, do you do one-on-one stuff with people stuff?
Okay. I do one-on-one also via Zoom because I work with people all over the world.
Yeah.
Via Zoom. I've worked with a comic down in India. I've worked with several in the UK and in Scotland and Ireland. And I've worked with, obviously Canadians. And so I worked with comics from all over via Zoom, of course all over the United States. This family paid me to, and this is how different stand-up comedy is now. Like now, it used to be something that, you had to just decide to forego your family's best wishes. Now you have parents dying to have someone teach their kids stand up.
Yep.
And so I had to work with this, this family paid me a lot of money, and because I did not want to do it. Because they were like, oh, our 13-year-old really wants to learn stand up. And I'm like, I'm not a kids coach.
Right.
I'm a comedians coach. There are plenty of people willing to babysit your kid, because that's what a lot of it is, it's just babysitting kids when you do the kid workshops. Yeah. And I'm like, I don't do that. I work with people that really want to be comedians. And they were like, well, we'll pay you twice what you normally charge. I'm like, oh God. Okay. So for 5 weeks, I sat there with this kid, and he couldn't take direction. He didn't have the attention span. It was annoying as all get out. But at the end, we wound up with a good little set, and he performed it for his family, and that was that. And then they're like, so will you keep working with him? And I was like, no, I will not continue to babysit your child on the weekly. Like, this was fine. Thank you for the check, but via con Dios. So, but the one-on-one coaching via Zoom, I do it a lot, and I definitely enjoy it so much. The coaching it's this sort of ancillary passion that I didn't realize how much I would really love, but I really love it. I really do.
That's awesome. So like someone like me who started, I'm about if you remove the pandemic, I'm basically 6 years, right? But if you add the pandemic, it's 8 years, because I was performing during the pandemic via Zoom, which is not the same. And it kind of like, I felt like it regressed me a little bit, to be honest with you. Like, it was a little regressive. But so someone like me, would they benefit from the 5-week pro workshop, or would you say going to the mastering stand-up would be the way to go if I was going to like do something like that?
Well, they kind of go hand in hand. I mean, for someone like you've been doing it 6 years. I think everyone benefits from something in the mastering stand-up class. I mean, there's something in there for everyone that just helps you with your process.
Right. And
it's so funny because I never know what that's going to be, but people always come back and they'll be like, what really helped me? And they always bring up one nugget that, just seared in their brain, was like the thing that unlocked something for them. And it is something different for everybody. I had someone just recently at one of my workshops who was telling me, it's like, man, when you explained how sarcasm works, as a base formula for building left turns, and he was like, that just really opened it up for me. And I've written so many of those now. And I'm like, well, that's great. I mean, the point is for you to learn them all and master them all and implement them all. But I'm glad you took that one. Like, that was just the one. So everyone kind of grabs. So there's something in there that really just sticks becomes something that they really wanted to know or understand or just clarify. And so that's always exciting. So there's something for everyone in the Mastering Stand-Up class.
Okay.
But with the 5-week class, and again, I have comics of all levels take the 5-week class. I have comics that have been professionals for years that take it because, number one, they trust me. But number two, they feel like they're working with a peer that they respect instead of somebody that should be just working, probably shouldn't be teaching at all, to be perfectly honest.
We know some of those comedy coaches. They exist.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, and it's one of the reasons I started coaching, because I just hated that they were soaking money out of these young comics and not giving them anything. I'm like, and then giving them bad advice and sending them out there with crap material. So, so of all levels, I have people join this workshop. And I try and separate them out from the people first time taking it for the first time. They don't really understand my process. And though, because I have comics that have taken this, that take it 5, 6, 7 times in a row, because what it does is, we all walk around with so much material, undeveloped material in our phones.
Yep.
And in the 5-week class, it just gives you an opportunity to finally get all that material out of the phone, and we can workshop it and see if there's anything in there. I'm very honest. If it's one thing you can count on me, is that I'm going to be very honest with you about whether or not there's anything in there.
Right.
And sometimes people believe me, and sometimes they don't. They're like, no, I think there's something in there. I'm like, fine, please, you think so, please keep working at it, take it out there, prove. I'm usually right, though. I'm usually the outside perspective looking in. People are right about my material. The reverse goes the same to me. If someone, that sometimes I'll try something, like, I'm not there. I'm like, you don't know. Then I try it. I'm like, oh, they're right. So so it happens, but it's all because it gives you an opportunity to get that material out of the phone and into a workshop where we can really work on it. And if there is anything there, we punch it up, we structure it up, we edit it down, we do everything to try and turn it into and it just consolidates what you would probably spend a year trying to get all these pieces out and try it and get them in, slide them in here and try it there and this. We just condense all that into 5 weeks, and you end up walking out with all that material worked out, tried out, at least experimented with, and you have a real idea whether or not you can just delete that right out of the phone or it goes onto the set list.
Yeah, I don't know. I was gonna say, have you seen?
There it is.
Are you looking at my phone? It's just ideas and premises and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah,
every day I just add something to this, and it just goes on and on and on and on. It's like, oh my gosh, yeah.
And it's hard to find, because when you do a real show, you really can't work in that much new material.
Yep.
And then when you're a professional already, you're not going to be spending a lot of time in open mics.
Nope.
And so this workshop is designed to condense that process and get that stuff out of the phone and onto the stage or off the page.
I love that. And then what is that? You don't have to give prices, but like, what is, if that 5-week class, like somebody wants to take it all on Zoom, it looks like there's not one for a little while, but like next time you do that, what's the kind of, oh, it's 400 or 350, and there's a level 1 and level 2. What's the difference on that?
Well, level 2 just means you've taken the class before.
Okay. So I would go level 1, right?
You'd be level 1. So so first time around it's 400, and then after that I give you a little bit of break because again, I have people that take it over and over and over again, and they use it for exactly what it's intended for, which is to work on that new material. And they walk and they'll tell you that. I mean, the reason they keep coming back is like this: I get a new 20 minutes every time I take this class. And so, and again, it's not a class, it's a workshop.
Yeah.
We're really, the other ones are classes. Crowd work is a class. Mastering stand-up is a class. Those are, I call them workshops because we are working on it. But the 5-week workshop is truly a workshop. We're really building and constructing material, for you as we go, and we do it both individually and as a group. And so it's a tremendous experience, honestly. And I hate to say this because it sounds so, but honestly, I'm the comedy coach I wish I'd had.
That's great. That's great. That's a great statement, because too many of us. Like, look, I started for my 35th birthday. I wanted to do stand-up. Like, that was one of my goals. I want to knock off the list. My wife got me a coach. I won't say who he is, but he's pretty famous in LA for being a comedy coach, and that's it. And it wasn't what I wanted. It was a very character-driven stuff that I wasn't into. I did learn the structure.
I know exactly who you're talking about now.
But I learned about writing jokes, so he was helpful in like understanding how jokes work and all that stuff. But the character portion that he wanted me to do, my wife even was like, I don't like this character that he's wanting you to do. It's not you. It's not what it is. So then I had to go.
It's a very 80s dynamic.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things I felt like most of the education out there was very dated.
Yeah.
You know, we needed current, you know, here's what's going on now. And listen, my education is constantly evolving because I'm currently in the craft.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the thing is you're not taking a class from someone who's watched a lot of stand-up or used to do a lot of stand-up. Like I'm in the game now. I'm a headliner right now.
Yep.
You know, I'm seeing comedy all over the place right now. So I'm bringing you the current stuff as current as it is for me, as it will be for you, you know? So it's very important to make sure that we're in lockstep with what's working right now, you know?
That's the thing is because, you know, too many people go, oh, Judy Carter's Comedy Bible. And you're like, yeah, but some of that stuff doesn't even apply anymore. The stuff she talks about in there, you know, or
I've specifically never read it because I didn't want it to get into my teachings. But everything whenever somebody goes, well, Judy Carter says this, I'm always like, well, I mean, I mean, there was a time when we would do that, but now it's a little different. And, you know, and I get that. I mean, like most, there's some things that's very usable, I would imagine. And then there are other parts that I would stress probably aren't, but, you know, not to judge that. I mean, most people read that book and that's good for her, but, you know, my teaching is very different from that. So, I just really try and, make you be your best you. You know, I never want, you know, there are teachers out there that are like, well, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. And I'm like, listen, do whatever you're going to do. Here's the best way to do it. You know, here are formulas you can implement to make you run faster. You know, that's it. I'm never going to change you. I'm never going to change your voice. I'm never going to ask you not. Now, I do advise against some things that I think that are just getting in your way. Like I recently was working with a comic out of New York on Zoom. And he sent me a set and I watched his set. And the first minute were cheap laughs. Were very, you know, hacky Asian jokes, just thinking, you know. But then behind that, after that, then he got into all this material about you know, being a male nurse and having been a meth head in recovery. And I said, listen, you know, I said, I wish someone had told me this when I was at your stage of the game. You know, there's a difference between cheap laughs and quality laughs. Yep. Yes, you're getting laughs, and and that's what keeps you doing those other jokes, because they get easy laughs right off the top and they make you feel good. Great. Now I want you to never say those jokes again. I want you to cut all of those jokes before you start with the male nurse stuff and just start there. Because that's really you. That's your stuff. And the rest of the stuff, you know, it's just getting in your way. It's giving everybody this impression that you're somebody that you're not. So I get it. They work for everyone. That's why they're hacky jokes. But just, they're in your way. They're only going to slow you down in terms of your development as a comedian. So I was just like, just never say those jokes again.
Smart.
You know? And he really got it. He really saw what I was saying. And he was like, so just start. Yes. I was like, start with the stuff about you. That is unique and rare and you and filled with really interesting experiences. Like, you don't need that other crap. I know it's a great launching point and got you laughs out the gate and got you started. But now let it go. You know, and this is something I wish someone had told me. I spent years doing material I probably shouldn't have done. You know, but nobody,
we all do,
you know, and nobody stopped me, you know? So,
well, then it's right though. You get those cheap laughs, you go, okay, well, they're laughs, right? So
and you're just like, but I'm getting laughs.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
But not all, and this is the point I had to make with him, not all laughs are created equal, you know? Simple as that. There's quality laughs and there's cheap laughs. And so you got to sacrifice the cheap ones for the quality ones. And learn, and that's where punchline dynamics become important, so that you build great material that are filled with quality laughs.
I love this. I'm going to take that mastering stand-up course. And then whenever you go, I'm going to keep an eye on it. When you do your pro workshop thing, I'm going to sign up, because there's so many things that I have sitting on my phone, or that I know could be better, that I haven't built up, that are just like, I'm go, okay, I got to do this. But when you're working, again, like you said, you don't get to work on workshop stuff as much as you want to, because you're there to get laughs. You have to put on a good show. You could sneak in maybe one joke here and there and see what happens, but you're not going to get the build that you need to build. And
it's hard. It's hard it's hard to build new material. It's hard to work it in. It's not when you're out of the open mic level, because you don't like to go back to open mics. Open micing sucks. Nobody crawls out of open micing, then goes back to it. It's very, very difficult. Although during this process, I do encourage people to spend time in open mics between the classes, to try out the material, to run it, to edit it, to practice it, and then we look at it again week to week. And that really helps. That's how you maximize the value of the 5-week workshop. So there is some time where you kind of have to go double back, but then you did it. You did it over the 5 weeks, and now you're out and you got the material, and that's that, So, unless you have a lot of bar shows and stuff that you can then go and do that at, but when we're working with new material, then I am, during that 5 weeks, I'm pushing you to get out there and go to an open mic and just sit there and do the jokes, do the stuff we're working on, try it out, work it out, practice it, hear it. And of course, you also have to understand, the dynamics of open micing. And, when you go back to it, it is very different, realizing you're not depending on any kind of response from them. You have to remember, it's not an audience.
Nope.
It's other comics.
Yeah. And they're all looking at their notes, and they're all thinking about their set, and they're all in their head, and nobody's paying attention to you whatsoever.
Yeah.
You may get that one laugh every now and then, but it's like, you're random. Like,
and that's the thing. What you have to remember about open mics, and this is just a little window into one of the many insights that I give people in the masterclass, is that open micers laugh at what's not funny and don't laugh at what is funny, because they're just riddled with unnecessary jealousy, and that's just never going to change.
Nope.
So you have to think of open micing as a rehearsal. You're just rehearsing the jokes. You're hearing it. It's hearing it for you. And you have to be honest about what you're hearing, whether when it's a dead spot, when you've been talking too long without a punchline, and sometimes it works. Sometimes you have a great night at the mic and the energy's all there and everybody's supporting each other, and then it's real fun and then it's funny, but a lot of times it's not. So you just got to realize that it's not about the reaction from the other comics. It's about what you hear and what you feel and how it responds to you. Then you bring it back to the workshop, and then we can get a real run at it,
Yep. That's exactly right. Now, with all the stuff that you learned, all the stuff that you've gone through in your life as a comedian, if you could go back in time to when you started stand-up, right? You were starting out, and just give yourself one piece of advice, just say, Greg, this is the one thing. If you just do this one thing, you'll see a huge impact. What would that one thing be?
It's funny. I get this question a lot. And here's the one note. I mean, for me personally,
okay.
It's tough, because I would say, it's hard, because, I would say, develop the clean material sooner than I did. But at the same time, that isn't who I was, and that wasn't the place and time.
Right.
I wanted to be a dirty comic. That's who I was. I loved dirty jokes. So I could go back and tell myself that. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. I could go back in time and be like, dude, develop that clean material sooner. And I'd be like, get out of my face. That's not what I'm here to do, because I love dirty jokes. I always knew it was one of the reasons, like, I had 2 different 2-man acts before I went solo. Okay. I had Greg and Greg, and then Greg and Linz. And the reason I had those were kind of to keep a rudder on the boat, to keep me from going straight into dirty, because I knew by myself I was going to say the filthiest things on planet Earth. And that's what happened. When I went solo, I said all the filthiest jokes you could imagine. But I was coming out of, the 80s and 90s where that shit was celebrated.
Yeah.
And it's what I'd always done. I just always, because just the way I was raised, I just always loved dirty jokes. So I spent 20 years doing incredibly filthy material. Now, I did it probably better than anybody else, and I saw a lot of success considering how filthy it was, and oftentimes hacky, I'll admit it. Again, no one told me. No one brought me aside. No one I respected, taught me anything. So one guy, I will say this, Dustin Chafin really gave me, he really tried his best, but I couldn't be told anything. I didn't listen. I really just loved doing that stuff. So, I mean, I would say that, but it would change nothing.
Okay.
So, but
what would be the advice that would change something though? What would be that advice that would change something, you think?
Okay, here's the one thing. This is the easiest thing that I get whenever people are like, what's the one thing? And this is the one tip, one structural tip that I can give young comics that I figured out pretty early on. But it'll help you out tremendously.
All right.
Okay, here we go. Open with your closer. See, most times when you're starting out, you have one great joke and a lot of just okay ones. And if you save it for the end, you've already lost them. So put it up front, get them on your side, and it'll lend its credibility to the rest of your crappy jokes. It'll literally improve your set instantaneously. So open with your closer. Simple as that.
I'm going to try that. I've never done it because my closer is a weird joke where you kind of have to go through the rest of my set to get there.
But and that's the one caveat though. And I call it the difference between a modular and a linear set. If you do a linear set where one piece leads to the next piece leads to the next piece, then you can't necessarily do that. But if you do a modular set where it's this bit and then that bit and then that routine and this, then you can do it.
Right.
So it depends on the type of material that you do and the way that it's arranged. I always encourage people not to be married to their set list so that they can move it around to meet the moment. But it is the easiest way to improve your set. Put your best joke up front and put your second best joke at the end.
I like that. I'm going to try that. I'm going to try this. What I'm going to try to do is because I have two different closers that I use usually. I'm going to try to put one at the beginning and one at the end and see what happens and see what does.
You're going to be blown away. You're going to be crazy. Here's the difference. It's not that the joke works better at the beginning. That's not what happens. It's that it helps the rest of your jokes work better throughout.
Okay. I like that. Okay. Well, man, Greg just gave us a masterclass. I mean, still go buy his class, go do his thing, but he just gave us a masterclass on the podcast, and I can never thank him enough. Actually, what's funny is, so we did JR's one time, and then I was at Haha hanging out, and then you and Ken both vouched for me to Terry, and I was like, he's only seen me do 7 minutes. He doesn't know whether I'm actually good or not. But you're like, yeah, this guy's great. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is a huge I walked back over to to Darren Carter and to Kevin Alderman and Alan Cunningham, and I was like, both of them just vouched for me, and they've only seen me do 7 minutes. So yeah, because 7 minutes, they're gonna know this guy sucks or this guy doesn't suck. And I was like, okay, cool. Because I'm like, oh, I should see more of people's stuff all the time to know whether they're good. No, dude, you 5 or 7 minutes, someone's going to know. They're probably going to know within 1 or 2 minutes whether you're any good or not, And I was like,
generally speaking.
Yeah. So I was like, oh.
And that's why it's important to open with your closer.
Yeah. Yeah. There you go. So yeah, perfect. I did appreciate that, by the way. I walked out of there going, 3 people came up and said, this guy's great. You should put him on the stage. She never has put me on at the Haha, by the way. But
that sounds about right. That's usually how that goes. That's usually how that goes. The recommendation is nice, but it almost never does anything. I mean, it's really, it's tough. You got to get a spot, get a guest spot. I mean, the recommendation is one thing, but then you got to get the guest spot, and then you got to, and then you got to crush that guest spot. That's usually the formula. So there's another one I'm going to give you right there.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. Thank you, Greg, for being on there. I'm going to put all the links to everything's for Greg in the show notes. So I'll put his website and then also the Comedy Institute website in there as well. You guys go sign up. I'm definitely going to be taking the mastering class, and then next time you have a Zoom class, I'm signing up for the workshop because there's so much stuff I want to do, and this is just fire.
That's what it's there for. And honestly, I wish someone. I wish again. I say that I'm the teacher I wish I had. I have the workshop I wish I could go to.
There you go.
And I try and work in my pieces, but usually there's so much work to be done with other people's stuff. I really can't. I don't want to spend the time on me. I want to spend the time on them when we're in the workshop. So it's I wish there was another night, just where I could be trying out all my material.
Dude, just do like a workshop with a bunch of comedians that you work with and then like just do like a roundtable thing.
I've thought about it. We've done that kind of thing, but it always falls apart, and I have very limited time, just like everybody else. So,
well, I'm down. If you ever want that, I'm down. Like, I would love to do that with you. It'd be so much fun.
Yeah. I've considered it many times. We'll see what happens.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Greg, for being on the podcast. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Please go check out Greg's stuff. I'm so excited. This has been a just amazing podcast. I really appreciate it. If you guys haven't checked out Funny Money, go check out Funny Money. It's great. It talks about comedy writing, how to make money in comedy writing. That's what I've been doing for my living for the last couple of years. So go check it out. I'll put that link in there as well. And thank you, everyone. Have a good one. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.